So let's get started. Where did the OM come from? They were designed in 1929. This was a period of great change for the Martin Company. They'd been in business then for almost 100 years, but they had already made some changes and there were more changes on the horizon. Guitar sales were excellent in the late 20s, but ukulele sales, which had made up a very large percentage of their income, uke sales were dropping off, and they were laying off employees, and looking at troubled waters ahead. They were getting pressure from their dealers to come up with guitars that would be useful for playing in bands and orchestras. There were a lot of banjo players out there in Dixieland bands and things like that, early jazz bands, and they wanted to play guitar, either tenor, four-string guitar, or a six-string, and so Martin was under pressure to move in that direction. They did two things in '29. First, a guy named Al Esposito from Carl Fisher Music Company in New York came to Martin and said he was there on behalf of two banjo players who wanted a tenor guitar, and they wanted something that had at least 14 frets clear of the body. And Martin did something that they had probably never done before, which is, although their early size 2 tenor guitars had 14 frets clear, they did it by just extending the neck out. They didn't change the body at all. So it was a very strange looking contraption with the sound hole up high on the body and the bridge way up in the middle of the body instead of the more normal placement. So John Deichmann, who was the foreman at the time, worked with Esposito, and they changed the size O body shape by lowering the upper bout enough to have extra frets at the top. And so it became the O18T, and it was a big hit with tenor players. They sold a few of them, and they started making them in '29. They sold quite a few, and they sold many more in 1930. So enter Perry Bechtel. Perry Bechtel was the fretted instrument salesman for a company called Cable Music in Atlanta. He approached the company at Martin about building him a guitar. He said he played a Gibson, but he wanted a Martin. And kind of part of the background of the story is Cable Music was not a Martin. They were not a Gibson dealer, and so the owner of Cable Music wanted their star salesman, as he went out and played with orchestras and bands, to be playing a Martin. That's what they sold in the store. So Bechtel made a trip to Nazareth, and to make a long story short, they redesigned. They worked with Deichmann again and redesigned the triple O 12 fret. And this is a triple O 12 fret. As you can see, if they wanted to just put a longer neck on it, they would have had to move the sound hole up, move the bridge up. What they did instead is, as they did with the size O for the O18T, they made this upper bout shorter. And that cleared up these two frets and allowed them to keep the bridge more or less where it is on the lower bout. And they designed a new guitar. And quickly, the significance of this was that this was the first Martin that was designed specifically for steel strings. All the other guitars that they'd been building in the late 20s would take steel, but they were initially designed to be gut string guitars. Also, this was the first new guitar design in 14 years or so for Martin, ever since the Ditsons that they designed, the dreadnoughts they designed for Ditson in the late teens. And it was actually the first new Martin design to be sold by Martin since, actually in about 30 years, since when they designed the triple O. So it had, as Al will show you in detail, it had banjo tuners, which they'd used occasionally in the late 20s, but not for a catalog guitar, solid headstock, a teardrop pickguard, and a narrower neck than anything else that they had built up to that time for a six-string guitar, and 14 frets clear of the body. In that first full year, after making 11 of those guitars, including the prototype in '29, the first full year was 1930, and they sold OMs in every style that they eventually made. So it was 18, 28, 42, 45, and 45 Deluxe. And of course, the Depression was in full blown at that point, and uh, the higher end guitars peaked in 1930. Half of the OM28s ever made were made in 1930. After that, sales tailed off. All the OM45 Deluxes ever made were made in 1930, and then no more in pre-war. And about half of the OM45s were made in 1930, and those sales tailed off. The exception was the 18, of course, the lowest price model. Sales started kind of slowly, not even as good as the 28s, but then picked up as time went on. So, and then very quickly, this was, as I mentioned, this is the first model designed for steel strings, and Martin made changes almost constantly from 29 to 33, mainly to beef up the instruments. They made the necks a bit thicker. They had changed the bridge plate from 1 inch wide to 1 3/8, I believe. They went from a pyramid bridge to a belly bridge, and overall just made the build heavier. By 1934, they decided to rename the model. Since they were building other 14 fret guitars, they decided to kind of rationalize the names with the rest of their line, single O, double O, and they called these, they changed the name to triple O, even though nothing else about the model changed. It was still long scale, still had all the other features. And it wasn't until then late in 34, let's say late summer 34, that it went to, the triple O went to short scale, T frets, and a T bar in the neck. And essentially, those early 34 long scale triple O's are OMs. There is no difference except what's stamped on the neck block. So we're going to turn to Al, who's going to talk about the key features of the OMs. Al, you're up.
Well, what happened here?
Okay, you're back now, looks like.
Oh, okay. I don't know. You locked up. I don't know if it was me or you. Go ahead, David.
Okay, I was done. I finished talking about the switch from OM to triple O in 1934.
Okay. You know, I think since the group is relatively small, maybe we should just unmute everybody, and if they want to comment, they can. It's not like, I think it's pretty manageable.
Sure.
So, except, can you figure out how to do that while I start talking? Because
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how to do it.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me. So, I'm going to also start with, David hit on this guy, okay, which is a 1929 0028. And so, as David points out, this is what Martin was making at the time prior to the OM, when they started making the OMs in 1929. And, you know, as you know, slotted headstock, 12 frets to the body, you know, side tuners. Can you guys hear me?
You're back. That was me.
Okay.
You're back.
I don't know what's going on with this connection.
Sorry, that was me.
Oh, all right. So, yeah, this we're getting kind of a fuzzy picture here too. So, you know, they went from this, which they were making in O's and double O's and triple O's and Hawaiian versions and Koa versions and mahogany versions, to what then became, you know, the early OM28. So this is a 1930 OM28 with the banjo tuners. It has the small pick guard. My guitar is a belly bridge. David has one with a pyramid bridge. Pyramid bridges are pretty cool, if you ask me, though. I've heard some folks say that maybe they aren't as stable. I don't know if that's actually true or not. And probably doesn't matter anymore because people are pretty careful with these guitars. The pyramid bridges are very cool in my view. So if we start at the top, you know, there's no logo on these guitars. The logos came in 1932, but of course there is. I'm gonna do this without banging. you can see it, there is a stamp on the back, the Martin stamp on the back. Guitar is a brilliant Brazilian Brazilian rosewood overlay on the headstock, and banjo tuners. You see people on the forums asking about banjo tuners and whether you like them or not. I mean, honestly, I don't really like them a whole lot. I'd rather have the side tuners, but they're part of the piece of this guitar. I mean, this guitar is supposed to have banjo tuners, so it should have banjo tuners, and it's part of the overall aesthetic of an OM from 1930. And these are actually replacement banjo tuners. I have the originals upstairs. They didn't work anymore, so these are the Waverly replacements. They work pretty well. One thing I didn't like about the Waverly replacements is the knobs are just horrible that come with them. They're big and they're clunky. And so these are the original buttons from the original tuners. They don't fit on the Waverly tuners, so you have to file down the post and put them on, but it's relatively straightforward. So, you know, the tuners are okay, but they're part of the aesthetic of it. You know, it's got the narrow OM nut and bar frets. So again, people ask about bar frets, and I think they're a mystery to some folks. The point of a bar fret is it's not a T, it's just a straight bar of metal, straight piece of wire. And it's part of there are two things about bar frets. One is the function of them in terms of the relief and action of the guitar, and then also how do they play? And people ask kind of different questions about both of those. And, you know, I've heard Larry Wexler likes to describe bar frets as being part of a system, and it's a system for the action and the relief on the guitar. And so by varying both the width of the fret wire, and the height, in the case of the width, you can use that, and maybe somebody wants to chime in who knows this better than I, you can use that to adjust the relief of the guitar, and which is of course the bow and the neck. And a wider wire will push the neck back, a thinner wire will allow the tension of the strings to bow it more. And so the width of the wire is integral to getting the relief right. You can also adjust the action slightly by varying the height of the fret. I don't think you do that with T frets. I've never seen anybody do it with T frets. Maybe they do, but I haven't seen that. And actually, when I had this guitar originally, I took it to T.J. Thompson to get set up. And at the time, the action was kind of high on it. And he said, well, you know, I can take the neck off. You'll need a new bridge because the bridge had been shaved, but I really don't want to do that unless I absolutely have to. I don't like to do that until it's the last resort. So he said, you know, I can fool around with the height of the frets and the nut in the saddle and get the action right doing it that way, which is what he did, which was kind of interesting because sometimes you hear people say, just take the bridge off. It doesn't make any difference. And then ultimately he did have to a few years ago reset the neck and replace the bridge on it. But the bar frets, that's sort of the engineering aspect or the structural integrity aspect of the bar frets. And then, you know, how do they play? I think that, you know, for fingerstyle guitar, they're really great because they're clean. You can really fret clean notes on them, I find. And also, I believe that because of the compression aspect, there's actually a vibration transmittal that happens very efficiently from the strings through the frets. And I think that's, again, somebody might chime in on this and say it differently, but I think that is, you know, part of the whole thing about this guitar that makes it sound good. It's just one aspect, along with, you know, advanced bracing and, you know, scallop bracing and the Adirondack top and the Brazilian sides and back that make the sum total of this guitar fantastic. So I think it contributes to the sound. And I think for fingerstyle guitar, it's great. If somebody wants to play really fast, you know, like we used to say in the electric guitar days with guitars with fast frets, I don't particularly find these to be fast frets. So if I got to be sliding up and down the neck, I actually think guitars with T frets are better for that. And that's my view. Other people might disagree with it, but for things where you're really trying to extract perfect tone and play maybe a little bit more slowly with your left hand and get a very clean fretting action, I think they're awesome for that. And of course, the other thing about this guitar is it has the long scale length. So, you know, the scale length is, boy, this picture is terrible I got here. The scale length is from the nut to The saddle, I've actually never figured out how to measure it because I can never get the measurement right. But this is long scale length, which is, what is it, 24.5 inches, I think. And so that's a 1/2 inch longer than the short scale length. And the relevance of that is that when you want to tune a string to pitch, so when you want to go to A440, if it's longer, you got to tighten the string more, so there's more pressure. The string's under more tension. That puts more pressure on the saddle and the nut, and I think that creates greater transmission of the vibrations to the top, and it gives these guitars more oomph. And in my mind, this guitar has a very broad kind of palette for how the amount of pressure and attack you use on the strings. So you can play it very lightly and it sounds good, but you can play these guitars, even though people think of them as being finger style guitars, in my view, you can play these things with a pick. You probably don't want to play bluegrass on them, but you can play with a pick or even with your fingernails and really kind of attack the guitar pretty strongly. And the guitar has the bandwidth, the headroom to sound good there. And if you play like a 00028, in my experience, they don't have that same bandwidth, and that's sort of the distinction in my mind. And these guitars tend to project very well, and they cut well too. And I think that's probably part of the whole. Again, somebody else could chime in if they have more to add on this topic, but I think the guitars project very well. People talk about them as being finger style guitars. I think they're great finger style guitars, but man, you can do a lot of things with a pick on these guitars too. I don't know, not a lot of people are going to play bluegrass with them, but you can certainly play lead, and you can strum, and you can whack away in 12-bar blues on these things with a pick, and they sound pretty good too, or they sound great actually. So I also want to comment on the finish. One of those, this is another topic that you see on the forums about guitars being refinished or oversprayed, and does it matter or doesn't matter? I mean, it's up to the person. It's also up to the price you pay for the guitar. But there's something that is absolutely wonderful about an original finish on a 1930 Martin. And like on this guitar, it's just dry and thin. And I don't know if that's the way they put the finish on, or if it just aged well and things have evaporated. I don't know, but it's just remarkable. I mean, it's so light, you can feel the grain of the wood when you rub your fingers on it. And when I go into one of these stores, like you go to the third floor of Groons, or you go to that room at Carter Vintage, and they've got all these guitars hanging on the wall, and you start picking them up. The thing that I always first look at is how does that finish feel? Is it that dry, thin, the patina of it's awesome, but it also, in my mind, contributes to a very resonant and kind of sensitive guitar. So anyway, and of course, this is a guitar that has the small pick guard. In 1931, it went to a longer pick guard, and the guitar got gradually heavier, I think, as David mentioned. And that's why sort of 30 and 31 seem to be the most desirable anyway for people to buy. All guitars vary, and certainly a guitar this later might sound great. I actually also own a 1931 OM28, and I actually like it better than this guitar, which is funny because the conventional thinking would be that this is a better guitar than the 31, but I actually like the 31 better. It just feels better to me, and it sounds better. I actually usually play this guitar in open tuning. I think it's like a killer guitar in open tuning. If I play it in standard tuning, it's great, but it really comes alive in open G or open D or something like that. So I don't know. That's sort of my thoughts. David, you were going to take it from here, I think.
Will do. Thank you, Al. And anybody who has a comment or a question, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up if you want.
There are actually a bunch of things in the chat here. I just noticed, David. I don't know if you saw that. This was about you being frozen up.
Oh, okay. Yep. And somebody mentioned that the blurred background was also blurring your guitar. So.
Yeah, I know. If we do this again, I got to get rid of the blurred background.
Okay. Briefly, I want to talk about why is it that these early OMs are desirable and collectible. And I think one of the primary reasons is because of the tone. They're extremely responsive to a light touch, and I think perhaps even definitely more than later Martins, and to some extent more than some of the earlier 12 fretters. They were very lightly built. The tops are thin, the bracing is thin, the sides are extremely thin, especially on the OM18s. In fact, they tend to crack pretty easily. The 18s. They have a small bridge plate. It's a maple, thin maple, 1-inch bridge plate, which got slightly wider in 32. Something I'd forgotten about but read again recently is the tripolo guitars have a flat brace under the fingerboard extension, and because evidently Martin decided there wasn't room for it as they shortened the upper bout, there is no flat brace under the fingerboard extension. So another way in which the guitars were quite lightly built. Al mentioned the long scale, which like him, I think contributes to the tone. How do they sound? These can be hard to describe, but many folks have talked about the even balance across the note spectrum with OMs. So the bass does not overpower the mids or the trebles, or the contrary. So you can play, like for me, I play fingerstyle, and the low E in the bass doesn't overwhelm the other notes. That makes it also easier to record. People talk about the note separation in OMs, meaning that if you play a complex fingerstyle piece, you can hear each note. You don't have the bass, the treble, and then a lot of muddy stuff in the middle. In my view, OMs have what I would call a rich bass and a focused bass. There are some styles of music where people really want to get that thump of the low E. This is now tuned down to D. But I still remember my experience listening to Eric Schoenberg's second solo album, where he was playing, I guess, a folk tune in drop D, and he played something up really high, and then kind of hit that low D. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, that's the tone that I want. That's what I'm looking for. Because on these guitars, especially with semi-fresh strings, what you're hearing is not just the fundamental of, in this case, the low D, but at least here where I am, probably not through all the electronics, you're also hearing a higher D harmonic, you're hearing an A, you can faintly hear an F sharp. So the result is a really rich bass, which is something that I appreciate in these guitars, and one of the main reasons why I play them. The mids are warm, again, not overshadowed by the bass, and people describe the trebles as being fat. So they're full, they're loud, they project well, and also they are clean all the way up the neck. A few more things about playability. The necks are comfortable. For my hands, especially the early necks, they have a soft V. They are 1 3/4, which for some folks is wide. But because of the slight V shape and the fact that the shoulders along the V are not fat, most people can get their thumb around, which is pretty important for fingerstyle playing. It can be harder on later necks that are chunkier and have bigger shoulders. So they are. It's narrow enough you can get your hand around it. It's wide enough that you can fret a single string and you're not going to damp the other strings that are near it. So having that much width is a helpful thing. Also, these early ones at least had the same string spacing at the bridge that the earlier 12 fret models did, which again is probably troublesome for flat pickers who want to have the strings closer together so they don't have to travel as far with the pick. For fingerstyle players, it makes it easier to get your thumb and your fingers in between the strings and to play more cleanly. And then Al mentioned bar frets. So those are some of my ideas about the tone and what makes them desirable for playing and for tone. But also we should keep in mind that they are somewhat rare. So they're very small production numbers. They made about 1,300 guitars total in 6-string. They made a handful of plectrum OM18s. They are fragile, It's hard to find them without top cracks. I mentioned the lack of a flat brace here, and they can crack, the tops can crack alongside the fingerboard extension, and it can be pretty nasty cracks. If it gets bad enough, it flexes the top and can break through the rosette, and you've got a big repair on your hands. I mentioned the sides, especially the 18s, they crack. And another reason for the rarity is that these guitars saw some tough use. They did not become guitars for orchestras and bands the way that Martin had intended. They really became guitars for kind of radio stars, for people playing in cowboy bands. Roy Rogers played one, and his guitarist played one. So they got some pretty tough use. These were not like the teens and 20s guitars where you'd be sitting around your parlor and playing songs for your family and leaving the guitar at home. These guitars saw the road. So they didn't all survive. I've seen some estimates of how many did, but you know, a relatively small number compared to later guitars like 30s and 40s dreadnoughts. So that's what makes them desirable. So I'll pause. We've got about 10 minutes left and see are there any questions at this point? And then if not, Al and I will just kind of show you in a bit more detail a couple of these guitars. Questions or comments? You can unmute yourself if you need to.
I'd love to just hear a little bit, just play a mini tune or something, both of you guys on both those guitars, because they're amazing.
Okay, well, all right, I can do that. This is a relatively early OM28. It was made in the spring of 30 when they were still using the pyramid bridge, so it's even a bit more lightly built than Al's, which was made along with one of mine. Was one of the last guitars stamped in 1930. Does that sound okay, Al?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. So,
I don't know, how did mine sound before? It didn't sound so great, right?
Good.
I've been having problems with
fine.
that. Is it
It's
fuzzing
okay.
up?
Yeah, no, a little, only slightly, maybe not at all. Yeah, it's a little bit fuzzy.
Should I carry on or let it go?
Go ahead.
I actually posted two videos on the Facebook page because I knew I was having problems with the audio. So a couple things there, but I mean, I like this is a double drop D tuning, and you can really get a lot of strings ringing. And David was talking about that note separation, and if you can really get strings ringing and that note separation and the resonance and the the mids just, and that balance really, it's just fantastic to listen to, actually. Again, I don't know what that's sounding like. One other thing I was going to mention that I didn't is, we always talk about how these guitars sound and their playability and that. There's also a beauty to these early Martins in terms of just the aesthetics of the way they're built and the craftsmanship. I mean, even if you just look at, the heel of the guitar, I don't know. I just think it's a thing of wonder. And like the 28s have volutes, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but just the craftsmanship in that. And I actually have a guitar here I'm going to do some Gibson bashing here. So this is a J35, okay? And this is a great guitar. I like it, but look at that heel. I mean, that thing is just a clunker compared to what you know, what Martin does. And, you know, I know people bash on Gibsons about the quality of the workmanship and the variability. I mean, this is a pretty good, this is a great guitar, but there's something about the visual aesthetic of a Martin and the herringbone trim and the beauty of just the back stripe and even, you know, a heel, that little heel cap. It's just great. And it's all part of, so it's a wonderful guitar. It's a wonderful instrument, but it's also, you know, an aesthetic piece in my mind. And that contributes to the overall desirability of these. So I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. Are there other people who have questions or comments? Please chime up. We got, this thing shuts off exactly at 40 minutes. So we've got like 3 minutes to go here. So what is somebody, if there are questions or comments, go ahead. Kirk, how are you? Can't hear you.
It took me 3 minutes to unmute. I'm great, man. Good to see you.
You too. Kirk, every time I go into Tom Crandall's shop, there's a stack of guitar cases to be worked on, and they all say Kirk Sterland on them. It's kind of a running joke.
Yeah. Well, that's the disease, right? I actually have a question. I've got a 29 0028, and you know I love it, and I'm a 12 fret guy, but it doesn't have that sparkle, and I'm wondering if it's attributable to the long scale thing, just generating a little more drive on an OM, if that's the whole game, or if it's the different sound box. I mean, every box is going to emote differently, I guess.
Well, yours would be long scale, Kirk, if it's a triple O.
You're right, actually.
Yeah, the 12 fret triple O's were long scale, and then so they carried that over into the OM.
Yeah, so that isn't it. So it must be the shape is what's really speaking to that then, is because it doesn't have quite the presence and the sparkle that, I mean, I love what it does. It does something else, right? Very layered harmonics and things like that. And this one is a particularly light I have. It's it doesn't have quite that. It's sounding more and more like a OM-ish, you know, a 14 fret guitar.